Thanks, Jennifer, and good morning to everyone. So my name is Mary McGrath, and I am the Principal Officer with responsibility for operations within the National Council for Special Education. I'm going to take the next 30 minutes or so to describe to you how we pivoted our services during the global pandemic. So since March, we have completely reimagined how we support teachers, schools, parents, and children. I'm going to take this time to outline our experience in that, what we did, and what our initial reflections are. And then at the very end, perhaps some thoughts on what our plans for the future might look like. So, just before we get started, I just want to give an overview of what NCSC's role is. So, we allocate supports to schools, we provide advice and support to teachers, parents, we undertake and disseminate research. We provide policy advice to the Minister, and we're also starting to develop a role in the space of supporting post-school young adults. This slide, there's a lot of figures on it, and I don't expect anyone to be able to read all of them in the time we have here, but it's to give some context to the service that we were pivoting. So during the calendar year 2019, we would have provided with our visiting teacher service support to nearly 6,000 school-going children and a further near 1,000 preschool children. We responded to over 2,000 applications for in-school support provided by way of in-person visits. We had 16,000 teachers engage in our professional learning, and we provided over 400 external courses. And this is just to give a flavour of the scale of the service that we looked to reimagine during this period. So in March 2020, school buildings had closed and remote teaching and learning was the story of the day. We asked ourselves some initial questions at this point in time. We knew that teachers in schools were quickly rolling out that remote learning. We knew that some schools would have a greater access to technology and online resources than others. Some would have had experience in this space and others not. We knew that students, like everybody else, were now at home, and that the lack of structure, the lack of the social engagement with their classmates, their teachers, the SNAs, and the lack of access to face-to-face teaching would be causing difficulties and were hugely missed. We knew that parents were trying to support remote teaching and learning at home along with all of their other family commitments. And again, like schools, we knew that some parents would have greater or lesser access to technology and online resources than others. We know from our research that children with the most complex needs regress greater than others in terms of breaks from school learning. And we asked ourselves, what do teachers need? What do parents and students need during this time? And how can the NCSC respond to these needs? So starting with teachers, we pulled together a group of our most experienced staff and we brainstormed as to what teachers might need. We came to the conclusion that teachers needed continued access to our in-school support service. They required continuous access to our teacher professional learning service. And we also thought that it would be very beneficial for teachers to have access to a set of practical resources and activities to support remote teaching and learning for students with special education needs. So first starting with that in-school support service. So as I said at the outset, we had responded to over 2,000 applications for in-school support in the previous year. So we immediately moved to converting that in-person support service to a video telephone conferencing facility. So that meant that teachers could continue to apply as they normally would have through our website for general support and guidance, and that will be provided via the telephone, video conference, or email, whatever as appropriate. In the initial weeks of lockdown, we saw a great demand for our visiting teacher service, and that was with a particular focus on assistive technology in the home. In the initial weeks, the demand for our advisor service was low, which isn't unsurprising really considering that teachers were getting to grips with remote teaching and learning. Demand, however, for this service has now returned to normal levels. And up until the midterm break of this school year, we've had over 500 requests from schools for in-school support service. Those requests have been in the general themes of what we'd have seen in previous years of autism and behaviour being the most common. In 2020-21 school year, we continue to provide these support services via telephone and video conferencing. And it's in essential circumstances only, our advisors, visiting teachers are visiting schools with obviously strict adherence to all relevant COVID protocols. In particular, the start of the school year has been quite busy for our visiting teacher service in terms of visiting schools responding to queries around assistive technology and Braille. So moving to our teacher professional learning service. As I said earlier, we felt that there was a real need to continue provision of this service in some capacity. Traditionally, the NCSE has provided our teacher professional learning in a face-to-face capacity throughout the network of education centres around the country. We had had some initial discussions within the organisation of moving towards a blended model of delivery, but this was our first time to venture into the online world. But very quickly in March, April, we made a decision that this was something that we were going to do. So once again, we pulled together a small group of people to look at this, and their first task was to select a platform from the myriad of various platforms that are available out there. And we selected Adobe Connect as our online platform, and we moved to deliver 2 of our key courses in May 2020. So we had a lot of work to do in a really short period of time. We needed to redesign our course for delivery in an online space. We needed to train ourselves in terms of how to do that and learn the technology as well. But in May 2020, we delivered our 2 courses, our 5-day of contemporary applied behaviour analysis and our 1-day course for principals and schools establishing new autism special classes. And despite all of our fears of broadband breaking down and other technical gremlins appearing in the system, they were a great success. And over 82% of the participants reported that they found the online experience either excellent or very good. And that gave us great faith that this was something we should continue on in. So then over our summer months, we moved to design our programme of teacher professional learning for the 2021 school year. And in doing that, we focused on 2 key pieces. One was, what were the key priorities for teachers? So if I'm a teacher with children with special education needs in the school year 2021, what are the key pieces that I might need CPD on over that first term? And this was done with a view to maintaining in-classroom teaching time to the greatest extent possible. So we prepared a short, focused programme of teacher professional learning for term 1. We moved to redesign these seminars for online delivery. We all know that working in an online space is very different to that face-to-face engagement, and there's a need to redesign our content so that there was short, sharp sessions, lots of interactive activities and breakout spaces, etc., etc. From our experience in May 20 of having delivered those 2 courses I mentioned earlier, we ourselves had actually learned quite a lot about the skill set that we needed in order to do this well. And in doing that, we reflected and we designed and rolled out a programme of upskilling of NCSE staff to deliver in the online space. That involved both training in the technical platform, but also looking at how we communicate, how we create interactive space in an online environment. The experience to date in this school year has been really positive. The programs we've ran, very good feedback. We've had the same level of attendance compared to our face-to-face programs last year, with many of our seminars oversubscribed to date. Our term 2 and term 3 calendar will be published shortly on our website, so keep an eye out for that. We expect to continue to deliver mostly in the online space for the rest of this school year, and we do hope to perhaps be able to rerun some of the seminars that were oversubscribed in this term to date. I mentioned at the outset the idea of having practical resources for teachers to support remote teaching and learning. And here on this slide, I'm just giving a short flavour to the myriad of resources that are up on our website to support your curriculum. So here we have a few different ones on supporting students with dyspraxia, learning through science for students with complex needs, communication on their junior cycle. Now, this is just a tiny, tiny extract of what's available on the website. And if you haven't engaged with that to date, I'd encourage you to go onto our website and have a look at those resources. Some more resources here. NCSE for the last 2 years have been running our InSchool therapy project in 75 schools and 75 preschool settings. And in March 2020, those therapists that worked on that program returned to the HSC to help out with the national health crisis. But what we were able to do was take some of the wonderful resources that they had developed over the past 2 years and republish them in a manner that would be useful to teachers in this space. So here we have some nice examples of resources around supporting self-regulation and communication. On my next slide here, we have some resources on supporting speech and language, again, produced in the InSchool Therapy project by our therapists. The NCSC strongly supported the Department of Education's decision to run a summer programme, and we were delighted to hear that it was also going to be expanded in terms of eligibility to cater for students with disability other than severe and profound and autism. And when we heard that this programme was going to run, we quickly worked with other colleagues in the education sphere to develop resources for this summer programme. And the resources were focused around 5 principles: a sense of safety, of calm, self-efficacy, connectedness, and hope. The provision of all of these resources was focused around assisting students transition back into formal education and enabling them to start recouping some of those skills and knowledge that they may have lost during the time that school buildings have been closed. There was lots of resources on getting started, supporting change, new routines, and all anchored in the theme of getting back to what we know. So that real focus on those recouping of those skills. We structured our resources in 2 different sections. We had guidance and support for the summer programme and resources for tutors here. Again, I would encourage those of you who might not have looked at this section of the website to go back in and have a look at it. While it was obviously designed for the summer programme, it absolutely has relevance going forward for other areas. So going back to school after the usual summer holidays can be difficult for some students, and particularly for students with special education needs. Others really look forward to that return to school in terms of the routine and the structure that school brings. And we in the NCSE were very focused on teachers and SNAs having been supported in this process in students returning back to school. And we worked with colleagues to develop resources around this space. So here you have an example of 3 pamphlets that we produced within the NCSE with a focus on returning back to school. So we have starting primary school, promoting positive behaviour and learning in the infant classroom, and developing rules and routines in that infant classroom. Our next slide here will show some more of these back to school resources. And this slide is quite busy, so I'm just going to call out a few things and again, encourage people to have a look at the website. So here we have some useful resources in the area of managing change in the returning to school environment, some resources from the Middletown Centre for Autism, resources around understanding COVID restrictions in a school environment, resources to support re-establishing school routines which may have been lost over the long period away from the school building, and some further resources on transitioning from preschool to primary and post-primary, and wellbeing resources from our colleagues in NEPS. So lots in there to have a look at. A few more examples of transitioning resources that sit behind that section of our website as well. So that is us finished with teachers, and now we're going to move on to parents and students. So we asked ourselves those same questions, as I said at the outset. What does a parent need? What does a student need? And what can we do to respond to that? In terms of what we thought parents and students needed, practical resources to complement and support that remote teaching and learning being provided by their school teachers. But the research also tells us that not all students with special education needs can engage in online learning. So we had a real focus on resources for those students so that they had structure and activity in terms of that time at home. We also thought that behaviour supports would be very useful for parents, and also some resources to support a return to school. In terms of behaviour, we know from our research that some special education students would really miss school. The structure, the social and emotional connections with teachers, SNAs, and their classmates. We knew that some students simply would not be able to understand why their world had been turned upside down. The school bus came yesterday, it's not coming today, and why is that? And we know that this level of change for students can lead to an increase in terms of behaviours, and therefore we moved to create a series of supports that will be able to, parents will be able to use to support that in the home. So we produced 7 booklets on promoting learning and behaviour at home. And these were produced by our new staff in the school inclusion model who had joined us in March 2020 onwards. So we have 7 booklets here. We have first one on understanding behaviours, home routines, reward systems, behaviour contracts, total communication approach, life skills, and transitioning resources. That's just popping in there now. In terms of parent resources, we created new sections to our website, and it was a kind of a menu style so that parents would be directed to the most appropriate resources to their circumstances. So here we have an extract from our website where a parent is selecting, my child is in early years, post-primary school, etc. And then that brings them to resources. So here I am a parent of a child in a special class or a special school, and I want to see resources on. So I might wish to see resources on promoting learning and behaviour at home, which would bring me back to some booklets that we saw there a minute ago and other resources. I might like to see resources on speech and language and communication. I might like to see resources on games or visiting teacher support, etc. Here's an example of some of the home resources for parents from the Visiting Teacher Service, with a focus on looking after assistive technology in the home. We also created from some of our occupational therapy resources a video on developing gross motor skills. And I'm just going to play a little bit of this for you, and we're going to test my technological ability here to get this going.
Your child's core refers to the muscles deep within the abdominals and back, attaching to the spine and pelvis. Core muscles help keep your child's body stable and balanced. Developing core strength is really important for your child in everyday activities, such as sitting up, getting dressed, and completing tasks in school like handwriting. Exercise 1. Egg. Lie on your back with your chin tucked in against your chest. Lift both legs off the floor and bend them close to your chest, holding your hands across your chest. Encourage your child to hold this position for a maximum of 30 seconds. During these activities, encourage your child to count aloud to ensure they are not holding their breath. Exercise 2. Superman.
I won't play the whole video, but that just gives you a flavour of what that looks like. Another significant part of the resources that we developed with parents and students in mind was our themes of the week. And these proved really popular. We actually ended up adding a few additional themes of the week as we got towards the end of the school year. And the function behind this was to pick a particular theme. So here we have science, games, transition and change, and to develop a package of resources for different students with different special education needs through that theme. So if I move on to the next slide here, and again, I appreciate that this is quite text heavy, so perhaps not easy to read, but just to call out a few things here. This theme of the week is baking. So within this theme, we have lots of different resources. So we have activities for vocabulary development based around the theme of baking. We have baking as an occupational skill, life skills development from our occupational therapy theme. We have baking suggestions for students with complex needs. We have visual interactive recipes for students with GLD and autism. So that just gives you a sense of how we built those themes. And as we worked through all of this, we're considering what is our impact. So are we actually reaching people? Are we achieving something in terms of all of this work that we have been doing? Because of the timeframes that we're operating under, it was quite difficult for us to ascertain answers to those questions. We really only had informal feedback to rely on. But that informal feedback that was making its way back through us to our various partners in the education space was really positive. We could see from our website metrics that people were engaging with the material, and we could see which ones were getting perhaps more attention than others. As I said, the behaviour pamphlets that I showed you there earlier were one of the more popular ones. We also got requests, as I said, for additional themes of the week, and we added a few more as we came to the end of the school year. So, reflections. What have we learned from these past number of months, and what are we going to take forward? How will it influence our delivery of services in the future? So when I sat down to write this presentation, or even when I was thinking about it in my head before I sat at a keyboard, I really started to think about what would we have done if we actually knew back in March, April what we know now. And this is just some of those thoughts that came to me. And one of the first things that struck me was that I think we would like to have more variety in terms of the presentation of our materials. So you'll have seen what I've shown you throughout this course of the presentation that we had a number of different kind of modes in terms of how we were presenting things. I would really have liked that we would have perhaps used a greater use of pamphlets. Material that was produced in that pamphlet format did tend to be more popular with people. I would have liked for us to have had a much greater use of videos. The majority of our resources were produced as text material, and I think perhaps moving some of those resources and making them more alive, I suppose, in that space of a video probably would have been very helpful for people. However, we had not actually previously created any resources in that video format, so we were limited in terms of what we could do with the time and resources available to us. I would have liked if we had been able to provide translation for all of our resources. So as I've been showing you some screenshots of our website throughout this presentation, you may have spotted that some resources had English and Irish written beside of it, and some didn't. So the majority of our resources we did manage to translate into Irish, but we had a time lag. So we would put the material up today and the Irish translation might arrive 2 weeks afterwards. And I think that was unfortunate. I also would have been liked if we had been in a position perhaps provide some of the resources in other languages, including the Irish Sign Language. A lot of the resources that I've shown you to date throughout the presentation have had a younger age group in mind. And I think on reflection, it would have been really, really beneficial if we had been able to create more resources for that older age group of students. It also would have been helpful, I think, if we had had greater engagement with our stakeholders. And what I mean by that is that when we sat down to answer those two basic questions that I mentioned at the start, what do teachers need, what do parents need, and what can we do in response to that, we looked at and answered those questions from an internal perspective. We brought our most experienced teachers together and brainstormed in that space. But what we weren't in a position to do due to the time frame was actually to perhaps take a wider view in terms of the answers to those two questions. So if we had been able to engage with our stakeholders, perhaps we might have had a more holistic response. Feedback. So as I said there a few slides ago, our feedback was informal. And I think it would have been really, really useful if we had been able to have perhaps a little bit more of a formal feedback loop to that. So we were relying on, what was coming back to us by word of mouth, or looking at the website metrics to determine which resources were the more popular, the more useful. Where if we'd had that formal feedback loop, perhaps we might have gleaned some more concrete information and perhaps focused on certain topics or certain resources to build more of them. But look, we were operating under tight timelines, so it's something to learn for the future. I think in terms of our teacher professional learning and moving it online, we have learned a lot about how to design material for online delivery. It's really not possible to replace the soft interactions that you have in a face-to-face course that's delivered in your local education centre. You can't replicate in an online space those discussions at tea break and lunchtime between the participants and between the presenter. However, there is a lot you can still do online, and that's about using lots of visuals, having short, sharp sessions, focus on the key messages, interactive activities like polls, breakout sessions. And as we have learned how to deploy those tools, I think, over the last few months. There are limitations, of course, to that online space for teacher professional learning and for the in-school support. And that is something that we're going to have to continue to work on in terms of being able to overcome. In particular, there's a challenge in delivering practical aspects to the teacher professional learning. So we deliver a lot of teacher professional learning that involves practical kits, for example, assessments. And we are still considering solutions as to how do we move to delivering that in an online space, should we be required to continue to deliver online for the rest of the year. So, the future. What does the future look like? Well, I don't think anyone can quite answer that. But in terms of our work here, in terms of the teacher professional learning and the in-school support services, I do think that going forward, we will absolutely continue to retain some element of the online delivery. I think it will look like a blended model going forward. What we will be doing is looking to the international experience and research in this space, particularly from recent experiences with lockdowns, etc., and bringing all that to bear to our future model of delivery. So I might hand back over to Jennifer for questions. Thank you.